We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
What does it mean to truly get naked in the context of manhood and masculinity? Is it just about shedding our clothes, or maybe more about shedding our armor, our societal expectations, and learning to see ourselves without them? Today, we're diving into a conversation that challenges some of these traditional narratives of manhood. Today, I sit down with Mark Grayson, who is a dynamic leader and the author of a new book called Getting Naked, a Field Guide for Men. We'll talk about Mark's journey from the corporate world to becoming a voice in the conversation about the evolution of masculinity. We'll explore his transformative experiences, including a pivotal moment at a conference that led him to publish private writings that he had been working on for years and eventually write this groundbreaking book. Mark will share insights from his life, touching on the importance of vulnerability, on the power of touch, and the need for men to reconnect with their emotional and relational capacities. We discuss some of the research about the reality of boyhood and how things change and how we shut down, and the cultural shifts happening around manhood, and how we can navigate these changes to live more authentic and fulfilling lives. So join us as we uncover the layers of what it means to get naked in today's world and how embracing vulnerability can lead to profound personal growth. Welcome to the Mankind Podcast.
Hey, everybody, it's Boysen Hodgson. Welcome back to the Mankind Podcast, the podcast where we set out to prove that there is indeed more than one way to be a man. This week, I am excited to be sitting with somebody who I've known for the last few years. I think it was Mark Green who introduced us.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I'm with Mark Grayson today. Say hello, Mark.
Hello. Great to be with you today, Boysen.
Thank you. Mark and I are going to be talking about the stuff that we talk about here on the Mankind Podcast, manhood, masculinity. Mark has a new book called Getting Naked, a Field Guide for Men. There it is. This is a powerful, unique book. Let me tell you a little bit more about Mark, and then we will dive into the conversation. So before becoming an author, and in addition to the kind of real talk about manhood and masculinity we're going to have here today, Mark has been a C-level leader in public and private sectors. He's a creative builder of brands and company profiles and a dynamic public spokesperson. He's a serial social entrepreneur, say that 10 times fast, who has brought 3 separate global startups to market. And we'll talk a little bit about his background just to give us some context for where this book came from. He's had 2 successful exits and 1 successful wind down. He raised over $117 million in early phase and mid-stage funding for some of the companies that he was involved with. And he managed multiple strategic partners, hundreds of employees, hundreds of contractors, organizations going to scale. And I haven't known him in any of those contexts. The context that in which I've known him has all been this manhood conversation. So let's go there first. So introduced by Mark Green, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what brought you into the manhood conversation even pre this book.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I certainly didn't imagine that I would actually be doing this work, given the trajectory that I was on previously. But I got invited to a conference in Ojai. I think it was in 2014 or so, roughly 10 years ago. And it was an interesting moment. Me Too had just hit, and I was invited to attend this gathering of 100 men that all agreed to participate in a sort of weekend where the usual paradigms were completely upended. And there were very powerful women on the stage leading the workshop. And all of us, all the guys in the room were in the position that women often are of listening to the men who are often leading workshops. And the purpose of that whole experience was to really sit down and listen to hear what women had to say and and to, and to say the things that needed to be said in the aftermath of those first allegations. And as part of that experience, and there were many different pieces to it, I found myself at the end of that workshop in a circle, a sacred circle, led by Rev Joe from the Agape Church in Los Angeles, who could invoke the wrath of God. She's a towering figure. And each one of us had to stand up before the rest of the men gathered and solemnly swear to take action in some way following the workshop. And shaking like a leaf, I found myself saying that I would begin to publish some of the private writing that I have been doing about these issues just to sort myself out over the last 3-4 decades. So that was really the origination of all that. And that led to publishing 50 essays. And then that led to an agent and indicating that she thought there needed to be a book for this generation that was like Sam Keene's Fire in the Belly. And at first I decided I really wasn't going to do that. You know how it goes. Eventually I'm here. So
So it was a hero's journey.
yes,
You got
it
the
was.
call. You
Totally.
got the call to write this generation's Fire in the Belly. And yeah, props to Sam Keene. So let's go backwards to go forwards a little bit too. This book is not Fire in the Belly,
No,
right? This
right.
book does not emerge out of that kind of mythopoetic
No,
motion, the mythopoetic movement, the kind of earlier men's movement. This book has a framing that is very, very up to the minute. Talk about some of the folks who have influenced. What I was struck by over and over in the book is, and so I talked to so-and-so who is the CEO of a massive and had a deep and intimate conversation about the problems that they were facing in their life and the transitions that they were going through. Like, this is not unique. Talk about some of the influences who got you really thinking into this subject.
yeah. Well, I think we have to start with Mark Green. I got to know Mark Green from the Good Men Project, where he was a senior editor, and I was just an instant connection when we finally met up. And I think Mark has made such a fundamental contribution to the conversation in his very lucid, precise summary of man box culture. And that really just hit me in the solar plexus. I mean, it really brought together a lot of pieces of my experience into a framework that I could actually wrap my head around. And if anyone hasn't read the little Me Too book for men, it's just required reading. Everybody should get a copy and read it. So that really helped cement a lot of pieces of my thinking that I had been doing over the years. And then I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Niobe Way. And Niobe's out with a book right now, Rebels with a Cause, which I got to read in early manuscript form. But we had a profound conversation about her research with boys for the last 40 years. And that's so aligned with a lot of the things that I had experienced and was thinking. And so I'm glad to see her out now with a book about the cultural implications of her research, because I think what we're going through right now is a cultural shift. It's slow and plodding, but I think we are making a shift. And we talk about that. I talk about that at the end of the book, interviewing you and others who are deeply involved in the men's movement. So those are two figures that influenced me a lot. And then I think, as you saw in the book, I have really been so blessed to have so many male figures in my life as mentors and as peers and as friends. Now, I should quickly add, I've had equal number, if not more, women mentors and women friends and women peers that I've learned as much or more from. But I am not suffering from a lack of connection to men in the way that as people are describing. Though, of course, I always want more. We want to have more intimacy in our lives. We want to have more friendships, and I'm always looking for ways to find new friends. So, yeah, those are, and we can go through that whole list. But I've just had such a rich life with lots and lots of inputs.
Yeah. So let's talk about turning points a little bit. So I know that one of the turning points that you had was you were in this incredibly kind of I'm just going to describe it as corporate. You lived in an incredibly corporate world, in the entertainment world, at Schwab, at the investment banking world, and this kind of crazy space. And then your life took a left-hand turn. And now I'm going to go to the title of the book, Getting Naked. When you and I talked before publication and you were like, yeah, I think it's going to be called Getting Naked. And I was like, wow, there you go. So let's talk about that, like, vulnerability that led you into bringing this forward.
Right. So I hit a wall turning 50 that was totally unexpected, as sometimes happens when you're a startup guy. Not all the startups work out. In this particular case, it was an incident that was totally unexpected. And we can talk about what precipitated that. But I mean, to answer your question, I found myself going through yet another career shift. And I was really tired. I had been on the road when I was doing the nonprofit for Chuck Schwab. I literally would get up at 4:30 in the morning on Monday and get on a plane and come home on Friday afternoon. And I didn't really know where I was going to be a lot of the time because it was a national organization. And the joke was that my office was at LaGuardia. And so I was just flying around all the time, and that takes its toll on you physically. So I knew that I had to get myself back in shape at that point as I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And so I did. And I also found myself feeling like there was something more calling me. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I started to have a set of conversations with people who are deeply immersed in various spiritual activities. I got into yoga and I got into meditation. I'd been a meditator since my college days, but I really went back into it big time. And one thing led to another where I found myself really thinking about, okay, I've got to figure out how I'm going to change my behavior so that I'm living my life in a way that's a little bit more balanced and sustainable. And I'm present for my family, even though I was very much present as I was flying around. I never missed a poetry recitation or a game or anything. I just worked it into my schedule, but it's not the same. And the boys were hitting their middle school and high school years, and I just felt like I just needed to be around. Anyway, long story short, I was also trying to figure out how can I be a hard-charging guy, like a traditional male, which I definitely identify with, and yet develop all these components of my personality at the same time. And what does that look like? And so those set of questions came forward. It was a huge, huge transition that I was going through. And as I was wrestling with all of that, I actually stumbled upon a New York Post article about a photographer who was doing a project that was designed to help men disarm the male gaze. And I knew that I was guilty of objectifying women, and that I was really intrigued by it all. And so I called the gallery that was actually exhibiting her work and said, I'd love to talk to you about it. She was photographing regular guys nude. And I went and talked to her. As it turns out, it was a woman. I didn't know it was a woman at the first instance. And that kind of threw me, but it made sense. And the more I talked to her, I realized that she was saying all the things that all these spiritual people had been saying to me. And I was really being called, I felt called to step up in some way and really begin to take seriously this journey of exploration that I'd been on my entire life, figuring out what it means to be masculine or yai in the 21st century. And I found myself agreeing to pose nude for her project. That's where the getting naked came from in the beginning. And that experience was profound, terrifying. I felt like I was being a fool. I just couldn't imagine why on earth I was doing it when she came in. And of course, she made me take off my clothes in the front door and stand naked, right, in public view, just to test my courage and commitment to the project. But then what I found out was that I was being totally liberated by the experience, that somehow I was carrying, as it turned out, a narrative about what it means to be masculine that wasn't really totally fitting who I am. And so literally, as I took off my clothes, I also felt this release of, oh my God, I get to just be me and I get to be seen just as who I am. That's incredible. And then, to my greatest surprise, when she showed me the shots after our session, I was completely blown away. I didn't even recognize myself. I mean, it felt like I was this tower of strength. And I'm only 5'5", so I'm not exactly a tower. And it just radiated out of me once I was able to. So that got me thinking about this notion of the power of being open, vulnerable, and accessible, which is something that we don't really, as men, understand because we're so conditioned to put on our armor and go out and do battle and fight and compete, all the things that we're trained to do. And this was almost the antithesis of it, the exact opposite of what we believe to be true. That there's and I'm not saying that there isn't importance in being strong and tough and all those things. Of course, that's a sign of maturity of all people, men and women. But there's also this great power in being, which Brene Brown and others talk about, but I had never experienced in such a dramatic and unforgettable way.
Thank you. Something that, yes, and then that becomes the kind of informing literal part of the book and metaphorical part of the book that's the metaphor that kind of drives the book through. Something that occurred to me and that you talk about beautifully in the book is that it wasn't always this way.
Yes.
Yeah. This idea of intimacy between men, this idea of physical contact between human beings, between men, this idea of like social nakedness, I guess is a way of putting it. The strictures we find ourselves under, the really heavy weight of the man box culture that we find ourselves under is actually more intense now than it was just a couple of generations ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple levels of this, right? There's the physical aspect of it. Now, so up until the 50s and 60s, I mean, Life magazine was publishing photographs of nude men on the front lines at war or at the locker room. It wasn't a big deal, right? I mean, you can go back and Google it online if you want to, they're there. But at some point during all this, it became a sort of a social norm that public nudity of any sort was, for men at least, was a sketchy thing and it should be avoided at all costs. And I mean, we even see it now, like in the men's locker rooms where all the communal showers seem to have disappeared, and there's a great deal of modesty in that. And believe me, I totally subscribe that there's spaces where modesty is absolutely important. But we've gotten to the other end of the spectrum, I think, in terms of our comfort with our own physical presence in the world as men. And it feels like we need to rethink some of the limitations that we put on that. But then I think it's also on an emotional and psychological level. It's hard to trace that one back, I think, because we don't want to trace it to the labels that we now use. But I do think that are problematic because when you look at the construct heterosexuality, it turns out, according to Hannah Blank in her book, Straight, The Brief History of Heterosexuality, I think that's what it is, that it was a construct that was invented in 1869, right? And like all constructs, they have their place. They explain a set of behaviors that are patterns that we observe in our daily life. But constructs can also be limitations, and they can also sort of shape and reduce the actual experience that we're observing. And I think what's happened is that well, as this construct has come forward, it's gotten codified and reified into a sort of a narrow set of definition of behaviors that constitute being a real man. And in fact, the data say that the emerging research say that where there's a lot more going on under the hood in all men, right? Then we actually really want to recognize. I think we push it away, push it down, or whatever. And I just feel like we're in a moment now where we actually have to acknowledge what is and embrace it and figure out how to work with it. Now, I think I think what happens, because that construct is so central in man-box culture, which is this dominance-based culture of masculinity that now we've exported around the globe. I think what has happened is that it's gotten woven into this other set of understandings, which Mark speaks so eloquently about, and Niobe as well, about how the virtue of being self-reliant and independent, and which is a virtue, has become such a sort of mantra that it actually has destroyed our ability or conditioned us in such a way that we're not as able to form friendships, because we know we have to be hyper aggressive, we have to be hyper competitive, we know we have to be strong and independent, and this is a really important one. We're trained to be rational and to detach from our emotions, and that's where we really get into trouble.
Yeah,
because then we don't have the emotional equipment, and we don't have the communication skills, we don't have the relational capacities that we need in order to form the friendships that we want. And frankly, we don't have the capacities to even solve the problems that we're dealing with right now, because the capacities have been conditioned out of us. So it's a challenge that we really need to work with, and as men and women. So yeah. It's a long-winded answer, Boysen. Sorry, I don't think I have short answers.
And the deal is there are no short answers in these conversations, right? These are long, slow, hard conversations that we have to engage in order to keep evolving our culture forward.
Yeah. And I think it's also is that the way I see it, it's a kind of multivariate problem.
Yes.
That is really tough to solve, because you can work on one element or component of the problem, but then there's all these others pieces of it, right? That needs your attention too, which is, but we have to try. It isn't, and what the other thing that's really beautiful that I found is that in working on one piece, they're all related. So you're actually working on all of them anyways. It's just, and they tumble out and come forward in whatever order makes sense for you. There's no one single journey here. It's a seven, in the book, it's a 7-part journey, but it's not like it's a sequence. It's like, it's whatever calling you to focus on is the thing that you need to focus on. And the other pieces will come forward when they're ready to be examined, in my view.
Yes, I think that's very well said. And for some reason, as you were saying that, the idea that goes back to the kind of spiritual underpinnings that we're talking about, the idea of grace entered into my thought, because it seems that might be one of the big missing pieces for men as we interact with each other, and for all of us, for men and women, as we're interacting in society, in these relations. Like, for me to have the ability, Grace, related to compassion, right? Related to empathy, to just sit with, wow, you're on your journey and facing whatever it is that you're facing. And I am on in my problems and facing whatever I'm facing. And can we communicate tenderly with one? Can we give each other the grace to be wherever we are in this struggle?
Yes. And there's so many things I want to say in response to that. First, I just want to say that Niobe has a way of actually making the experience of sitting with someone else in a way that is full of grace, in my view,
Yeah.
that I think we could all really benefit from. She's developed a set of interview protocols that she has used for 40 years. And these interview protocols have now become a system that she's helping people learn of how we can better interact with each other with grace, with curiosity, with an open heart, so that we become better listeners, and we begin to have a deeper level of understanding and empathy for the person and the set of issues or the story, the narrative that they want you to know about them. And it's just a beautiful model for interaction that I think we can all benefit from. I also think that grace is an interesting word for you to choose, because there is that whole centuries long line of thought. Are we justified by our works, or are we justified by grace? And I think we tend to live in a world where you are what you produce, and you're trained that you are the master of your own destiny, and that you get the kind of output that you want depending on the kind of input that you put in. And I think we all know that at some point in our lives, we have hit a wall, and that those views of our experience are insufficient to explain the actual experience that we're having. For one reason or other, we're being benched. We're on the sidelines. I can't explain it. You can pour yourself into whatever your solutions are for getting off the bench, and it isn't happening, right? It's just the way life is. And so I think that it's really hard to cultivate sort of the inner adaptive capacities that are required to deal with those moments. It helps a lot to understand that we aren't in charge, that there is something else going on, that everything that we've earned in life is actually a gift, and that there's a certain wisdom in being willing to sit in a space that's a blank slate and accept that something's going on that's going to unfold, and your life is going to come together again, and it's going to take off probably in a new direction, or maybe just in ways that you can't even imagine at this point. That certainly has been my experience. But then I've been, as you said, a serial social entrepreneur. So I have been through lots and lots and lots of creative destructions and then rising again. So that's really been the experience of my life. And I know that there's other people out there that have none of that experience. So I'm probably talking nonsense to them at this point, but that's
We're thrilled to have BetterHelp as a sponsor for the Mankind podcast. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist for live one-on-one sessions, someone trained to listen, support, and offer helpful insights. If getting one-on-one support feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to betterhelp.com/mankind and get 10% off your first month of therapy.
And an image, a set of images arose in me as you were talking about that, right? So I'm going to just, bullet it as scientific materialism. If I input this and I do this process, then the output will be this, right? And like, I want to reproduce this reliable system that if I put in the effort, if I I'm going to get the results. And on some level, that ties so nicely into the man box. And most of us, I judge, certainly me, I wake up and I'm looking around at my comfortable box where inputs and outputs are lining up and it's just a tally sheet and and there's a crack in the fucking wall.
Yeah.
And a blinding light is shining in. And I can choose to do one of two things. I can either grab a roll of duct tape and try to close that fucker up so that the light doesn't get in, or I can open it up and see what's there. And that's scary.
That's
right?
very
That's
scary.
A terrifying proposition to actually open to that unknown as you're talking about it.
Yeah.
So,
but it's so important to do so because because that is really what leads to the next great adventure. It's opening up to those cracks and letting the light in. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing in. Yeah, your book just pulls so much together. So you mentioned Niobe ways, the narrative interview process. It's in your book.
Yeah.
You actually lay it out. You talk about the relational skills that needed to build that. I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. She was really thrilled to see it in there too, because because men need it the most.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I think women, well, we haven't really talked about that, but so let's go there. I think that relational intelligence has been unfortunately gendered as something that's feminine. It's something that, frankly, according to all the research, Judy Chu and Carol Gilligan and Niobe Way, boys are born with these relational capacities. Right. Boys are born with being emotionally fluent, but our culture trains us to devalue those capacities, to gender them as feminine. Yeah. And so over time, we increasingly disconnect from those capacities because they're girly and we don't want to be seen as being girly, right? So there's a big chunk of the book that really takes a whole chapter that points out that our culture so devalues things that we associate as feminine, and that the men are crippled. Because, and it's in the beginning of the book, I talk about this really funny story about my own son who takes a childhood development test and only fills in half the incomplete man test. And I feel like that's just such a beautiful metaphor for where we are as men, that we get half of us conditioned out for one reason or another. And it's just really important to reclaim those capacities that we're born with, that are innately there. It's not that they're feminine. They're part of our humanity. And yes, okay, fine. There's going to be some differences in the way that we express them due to the way in which we develop our identity as men and women. But we have those capacities and we need them. They make us well. They make us whole, right? And we ignore them at our peril. I mean, I don't want to go into all the research because it's been cited so much, but there's an epidemic of health problems right now that men experience because of this culture that have to be addressed. And I really do believe that the way in which we address it is each one of us taking on the task of really rebuilding our identities from the inside out. Every great faith tradition around the world has said, if you want to create change yourself. Take that Han. I mean, you go through every single major figure has said it one way or another. That's where change starts. That's how it occurs. Yes, we need to be in groups. and we need to have systemic change. And I mean, I don't diminish that at all, but it doesn't happen unless you actually have, it starts at the individual level. So what this book is, it's my attempt to try and figure out, what does that change look like at the individual
Yes.
level?
Beautiful. So I'm going to, I think that puts us perfectly into the 7-part journey. What I'm going to present here, and I'm going to leave this hanging in the air for the audience so that you will go and actually pick up the book. 1, get naked. There's that metaphor. 2, get in touch with your, quote, feminine side. 3, learn how to engage and express the heart. 4, acknowledge the full range of your male sexuality. 5, develop a daily contemplative practice. 6, make time to withdraw completely from the world for rest and retreat. And 7, reframe definitions of success. So that's the scaffolding that we lay in. As you said, we're all working on all of those simultaneously at some level.
Yeah.
And where are you getting the most leverage in your working of the scaffolding these days?
Yeah. So, well, I think you have to look at what the stage of life that I'm in.
Yeah.
Depending on which tradition you follow, I'm either in the third or fourth stage of life. I think here in the West, we talk about the sort of the golden years that we enter into if we have kids, once our kids are out of the house, if they're ever out of the house. I personally love having them around, and they're out of the house mainly. So I get to have it both ways. But so I'm in that phase. I mean, if you follow the sort of the Indian tradition, I believe it's student, householder, forest dweller, and elder. And so I did, turning 50, as I mentioned earlier, go through a pretty big transformation. And I find myself in a phase where I'm straddling the forest dweller, really going deep on the spiritual stuff, and then bringing it back into the community and bringing it into action. And so I am now working more on projects than focusing on a single work experience. And there's 3 right now that I've been working on for quite some time. They're big. I seem to specialize in projects that are impossible to do. But one of them is actually sharing whatever insight I have from my life and all the conversations that I've been able to have with men and women about masculinity. So that's one big piece. A second piece that I've been working on is related to the spiritual journey that I've been on, recognizing that we live in a secular world that increasingly seems to not want to be involved with organized religion. But at the same time, individuals are expressing a sort of a deep hunger for meaning and purpose, and some desire to have some kind of spiritual support on their journey, whatever it might be. We took that to heart at the church that I attend, which is going to celebrate its 300th anniversary next year. And we actually created a community for people who don't want to go to church. Church for people who don't want to go to church. And it's been really fun and successful. I think we just had our 30th conversation. We've been up and running for 5 years. And these conversations are just so energizing. I mean, we're drawing in all kinds of people from the community, and it's been fun for me to sit in dialogue with people that, well, some of them I reference in the book, but they're just amazing thought leaders, some of whom have lifelong contemplative practices that they share with us that are not going to ever find shape in a religious setting, but they can be expressed in this community. So I've been having a lot of fun with that. And then the third big project that I've been working on is a civics education project, leveraging the collections of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian as a springboard into teaching civics at the secondary level. There is no room in the schedule for civics anymore. So the curriculum maps are being created to show teachers, help teachers integrate these resources, the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian, into the classroom in history and English and science and math and all that kind of stuff. Because I really feel like we've lost the art of having really good, positive conversations when we don't actually always agree. And I'm really happy the project has been funded a little bit by Congress, and it's been named in honor of John Lewis and my father-in-law, Amo Houghton. So it's a little bit of a legacy project for me as well.
That's beautiful. I didn't know about that project.
Yeah. And I'm sure there'll be other ones as well. It's just give me time. I can't seem to help myself.
What lands there for me is, so those 3 different projects, there's something holistic about the way that you were approaching life in this stage, right? It's like you're drawing from civics and history. Like there's a little bit some hard and factual about that. You're drawing from this spiritual practice, and you're drawing from all of this understanding of culture and what shapes culture for gender, which is really cool. So I'm going to go to something as we're getting closer to the end, very uncomfortable, which kind of comes up in the idea that you're creating church spaces for people who don't want to go to church. The idea of being in physical proximity to one another and our culture's fear and taboo around human touch and human contact. So talk a little bit about what you've been learning around that, because I think it's a profound part of the book. And I'm going to say, you don't have all the answers, but the exploration is really needed, necessary for us.
Yeah. So I have always been aware, I think from my earliest stage, of the power of touch to communicate and to heal. And so I think that's been a sort of a parallel journey that I have been on, of really understanding. And now I probably shouldn't get a little bit metaphysical, but I hope that's okay. But really understanding the body, mind, spirit connection, and how important the role of the body and our senses are in helping to align all dimensions of our being. And we know from lots of different research that we store emotional trauma in our bodies. And a lot of the great work that men's groups are doing, like NKP, involves getting in touch, literally, with the places in our bodies where we're storing our trauma and pain. And so I've been really concerned about our culture right now, in which we seem to be increasingly reluctant to have that kind of contact, non-sexual, consensual contact. I think we've lost some of our fluency in the language of touch, because again, it didn't always used to be this way. There was, depending on which culture or tribe you were in, there was a set of shared understandings that there was things that were okay, pats and hugs and kisses on the cheek and whatever, between men and women, and between men and men and between women. And I feel like there's a real hesitation now, and understandably so, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding of
pain
and injury, and we have to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
That has to be the first Everybody has to feel safe. But I think there's a way of developing our skill, our language skills, to include an element of touch that it enables us to communicate better and to also do the kind of just daily work that enables us to heal. And we've got Vander Kolk, and there's a wonderful extended essay by Richard Kearney, which I cite in the book, that does a beautiful job of collecting all the different research on this topic and makes it a pretty strong argument that we need to, that he calls it, I believe, a commons of the body, but just that we need to have a new set of shared understandings of what it looks like to be healthy. We are physical beings, and we need to, we really need to acknowledge that and enjoy that and share that.
It's only been in the last few hundred years, right, that the idea of private space has actually been a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of years as primates, we exist literally wrapped around each other.
Yep. 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 And I think it's especially problematic for men because, of course, then everybody wants to prove that they're not other, right?
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out what that looks like so that everybody feels comfortable is a challenge. But it's one that's worthy of tackling.
And maybe it's not trying to figure out what makes everyone comfortable, but trying to come to agreements about the level of discomfort that we are willing to contain within our relational spaces.
I love that. Can I steal it?
Yes.
No, that's beautifully said, Boysen. Thank you.
In the Mankind Project and in other groups, like that's one of the things, right? We're not looking to create a safe space here. We're looking to create a safe enough space for extraordinary bravery.
Right.
From each of us, right?
Right. Yeah, no, doing this work takes courage. Yeah, you have to be bold and fierce in order to do the work. It is a cakewalk, for sure. But at the end of the day, you end up being more yourself and get to be more natural, fully yourself.
Fully yourself, fully human. The book is called Getting Naked, A Field Guide for Men by Mark Grayson. Here it is. Go pick it up. It's got an incredible, what was it, Vertigo? The movie Vertigo, that we looked at the cover design. Like, yes, that's got a bit of a vibe to it.
It's Saul Bass, I think. It's
Saul Bass, the artist.
Saul Bass. He did a lot of movie posters back in the day, and it feels like that to me. Yeah.
So how should folks find you? So go buy the book, and how should folks find you and learn more about the work that you do?
Well, it's on Amazon and all the online platforms. I do have a website, which I'm not very good at looking at, so I shouldn't say that. I'll make a man collected, but I'll correct that. You can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and God knows all the other platforms.
All those spaces.
Yep.
And if somebody is actually close enough to us here in the Northeast for the gatherings that you've been creating, do you want to say a little bit about that?
You mean the Trinity Spiritual Center?
At Trinity Spiritual Center, yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely check out, trinityspiritualcenter.org. Yeah, we have a whole list of programs that are coming up, and it's an exciting year. I think you'll find stuff there that you'll enjoy. And we're always adding programs, so check back. Okay.
Mark, it's an honor to be your friend. I am encouraged and buoyed by your courage to be out there in the world. Thank you for creating this book.
Well, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you, Boysen, and I really, really, really look forward to continuing it.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.
Hey, it's Boysen. On the Mankind podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.